Okay, welcome back to our afternoon session. We have one more topic here. Welcome, Director Budd. We're going to be talking about what you all do and also talk about some funding sources for emergency response. So feel free to take it away and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lynn Budd, the Director of the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security, and my brain support over here is
I'm Nick Wardle with the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security. I'm the radiological and hazmat specialist and liaison for the CERC, and I deal with the tier 2 filing for the state. So, which
we'll explain. Okay, thank you all very much for having us to your committee. We appreciate the attention for this particular issue. I want to give you just a quick history of the regional emergency response teams and the BOM teams. They were created under the State Emergency Response Commission legislation, which is 35-9-153 in 2004 to address what we call CBRNE, which is to address that capability gap, which is CBRNE stands for chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive. There was a gap identified at the local level, and the state decided to help supply some training, equipment, all of those things to assist local jurisdictions to be able to respond to those types of events. It was certainly realized that in a state like ours, we're not able to develop that capability in every jurisdiction. So we went to a regional concept, and at that time, there were 7 teams established that served multiple counties. Later on, the 8th team was added in Teton County. They only cover 1 county, mostly due to geographic conditions in the winter and things, trying to be able to get to them or for them to get out. That just makes sense. Sort of the agreement was the trade-off for the state providing the capability, the training, the equipment and everything was that they would support outside of their jurisdiction. So, for instance, our ERT1, which you'll hear from later, has 5 counties to take care of. So any incidents that happen in those counties, they're responsible for taking care of those. The statute also provides, in conjunction with the fire marshal, standards for training for all of the regional emergency response team hazmat members, as well as certification training support for BOM teams, but they're accredited by the FBI. The capability also includes the supply of explosive detection canines. So our Homeland Security grant generally funds that capability at the local level, and then they take responsibility for the upkeep and training of that, care for that animal. Responses for these teams are supported through our 1110 account, our state support fund. The federal grants that we utilize are not allowed to be used for response. And so that's why that 1110 account is very important. What happens is either law enforcement, the emergency manager at the local level, or members of the team call our 24/7 duty officer and ask for an activation. It's not permission, but it is activating the team to make them a state team to indemnify their activities and provide them with that support. When the teams were formed, the Homeland Security grant in 2004 was $15.9 million. And that was fairly consistent at that point in time. Our Homeland Security grant, so at that time, with that 15.9 million, all of the teams were equipped with vehicles and trailers and training, and that's how old their equipment is now, 2004 in general. At that time, the Homeland Security grant was also quite open. Basically, they were throwing money at us, and we got to just spend the money in different allowable expenditures, but not very many restrictions. In contrast, the 2024 Homeland Security grant is $4.3 million. So we went from 15.9 to 4.3. We also have many more requirements with the Homeland Security grant now. We're required to pass through 80% to the local level, which generally isn't a problem, but that's 3.49 million that has to go out of that to the local level. This period, which we actually are just going through our application period right now, for that 3.49 million, We received 142 applications totaling 10.8 million. There's a lot of hard decisions that have to get made, and we have a lot of wonderful people with expertise that help us make those decisions. But basically, there's a lot of people who are not going to get funded for those things that they'll be asking for. 20% that's kept at the state level also funds projects with Highway Patrol, DCI, Department of Corrections, ETS, and our office. Two other requirements. It doesn't add up, so don't try to add it up, but 35% of the grant, the total grant, has to be spent for law enforcement, terrorism prevention activities. So it has to go to a law enforcement entity, which bomb teams count as, by the way. 30% of the entire grant has to go to the national priority areas, which there are 6. And in one of those, we're required to spend 3% on election security. So a lot more restrictions on the money that we're allowed to use to support the regional response teams and bomb teams, as well as, of course, all of the other entities that we support with the grants, which includes schools and counties and hospitals, all sorts of things. So the handouts that you were given, I've just been informed, are not completely correct, but we'll be working through that. Give you an indication of the equipment that is currently available at the local level. The first one that says RERT vehicle fleet information talks about each RERT and what type of vehicles they currently utilize for their response, not type, the age. There are a couple of outliers. RERT 1 purchased its own hazmat response vehicle in 2023, and you note the cost was $1.3 million. RERT 8 was not allotted the regular trailer in the beginning because they came into existence later, but they were later given money to help fund their equipment as well. Some of the current vehicle issues as listed there, many areas such as the RERT 3 that's located in Albany County, it's a tractor trailer. I mean, it's a tractor with a trailer on it, like a fifth wheel kind of a thing. Really not conducive to driving in winter conditions on I-80, trying to get to maybe a wreck of a spill with a wreck and things like that. So that's pretty, it's pretty limiting for them. The vehicles that were purchased were all the same, and they were built for more bulk transport of equipment than really a response vehicle. Due to temperature sensitive equipment, the vehicles must be kept indoors. So that's also a pretty large vehicle to have in there. We had a meeting with all of the regional response teams, all but regional response team 5. So it's 7 of them last week. And thank you to the legislature for giving the funding to our organization, our agency, to be able to assist with purchasing new equipment for them. If you will recall, we were given $4 million for the regional response teams and 1.5 for the bomb teams, and we really do appreciate that support. As you can probably see from the amount of grant funds that we get, we're at a point in time where we're not able to replace those vehicles on our own. It would take the majority of a grant, and it would take 8 years to do that if we just dedicated that money each year. So again, we really appreciate that support. We had a fantastic meeting, and we were very, very proud of our teams, how they worked together, and they talked about each other's needs and about how they could utilize this kind of equipment or replace one part of it or whatever. They did a fantastic job of talking through that. And then we'll be meeting with all of the bomb teams this week, and we'll complete their assessment. So we just took a look at what were they needing? What were you missing in your cadre of equipment there? And not that they'll be able to get everything, but that's where we started. And then looked at also the ability to obtain the equipment. Most of the vehicles that are considered appropriate for hazmat work are about 2 to 4 years out for receipt once you order them. So it takes a lot of time to get those. And this may actually end up helping us do a little more staggering as far as the purchase of equipment goes. So that may be good, but it will still be a while before anybody gets any replacement equipment. So when, again, they were very conservative and they were working very hard, but in looking at the current estimate of needs, it came to $8.45 million. Total estimate, total guess. Because if the CPI increases greater than 5%, companies can come back and say, your price is going up. So even if you order it today for $1.2 million, when you finally take receipt of it in 4 years, it could be 1.6, could be something else. So there's that variability there that is hard to estimate at, the time of purchase. So I think trying to illustrate the valuable capacity and capability that these teams have been able to provide at the local level. We do have a member of one of the RERTs here who can talk to that. And I think what I want to leave you with very quickly is the fact that we really, really appreciate the funding. I think you can see that it is needed funding, and that with the reduction in the Homeland Security grant that had originally supported them, which we do still support them on an annual basis for equipment needs and training, all in, their operational costs are reimbursed. So we do still support them through several different funding mechanisms. The cost of these large expenditures to support them with their equipment is just not anywhere in our budget. So I think we need to think about some way to support these teams in the long run because they are a great asset for the local communities.
Okay, thank you, Director. Any questions so far, committee? Oh,
Yeah, I guess so.
okay, Senator Cole, then Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, can local counties support this operation and give them money if they so desire? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cole, absolutely, and they do. So all of these are located generally within like a fire district or whatever. We have to have an administrator. The equipment, again, it's meant to help support the teams and increase their capability. So, and J.R. Fox is here and he can talk about how this works. But essentially, when they go out on a call, they're taking their equipment and our equipment as well. So they are supporting that response. Our reimbursement process works that if they are within their own home jurisdiction, the first 2 hours is on them. So even if we call them and ask them to respond, that first 2 hours is on the local jurisdiction. And then we will also, we'll reimburse them for the commodities used, but we won't reimburse them for time. If it's outside their jurisdiction, then we pay for their time to make that response.
All right, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curious, because I don't read a lot about bombs being diffused in Wyoming. Can you give us some idea how often this equipment has been used since it's come out?
Okay,
Mr.
go ahead.
Chairman, Representative Pendergraft, I would like to phone a friend and see if our good friend here, who is on one of the bomb teams, can give you some information on that.
All right,
Mr.
welcome.
Chairman.
Yeah, please introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
I'm Joe Tomich. I'm the Undersheriff for Sweetwater County. So to answer that question, I mean, Representative Nemec probably can speak to it even better than I did based off of his multiple years as on the Sweetwater County Bomb Squad and as the commander of that squad. But in general, the equipment's being used not only just to defuse bombs, but there are so many other uses that we use the equipment for within our duties to try and make the best of it. So outside of just responding to suspicious devices or those kind of calls, we use the assets from the bomb squad to do things such as carry out tactical operations throughout, really for our team throughout this corner of the state. So there have been multiple times where we've used the robot assets to, outside of just responding to deal with bombs, we're using them to deal with potentially dangerous people as well. So on a times per year, it varies for us. It could be, I mean, busy years could be upwards of 25 deployments or more per year. Slow years are probably 10 to 15. I mean, but that's probably on a slow year for us. So, and which assets we're using varies depending on what the issue is that we're dealing with, whether we're dealing with pipe bombs or whether we're dealing with suspicious backpack or whatever it might be. We're using different pieces of that equipment. So just because we have a robot doesn't mean that that's necessarily something we're using each time. However, we also have X-ray systems that have been provided through Homeland Security grant funding. And we use those, I mean, outside of just bomb investigations, we've actually used them for criminal investigations before, that actually built really good criminal cases for us that we were able to prosecute at a federal level just because of a suspicious package. We were able to X-ray, identify that it wasn't a bomb, but that there were some other things involved. So these assets get used across the board outside of just responding to and diffusing, dangerous or explosive devices. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. Senator Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under Sheriff Tomich, could you, good day. Could you please, there was a situation that you could maybe talk about when it comes to the use of that robot with a murderer that was running around this county here, that could you please tell how that ended up because you were using that robot?
Absolutely. Thanks, Senator Cole. So almost 2 years ago, within a couple weeks here, for those who don't know, there was a shooting at a bar over in Green River where a man walked into the bar and shot 3 people, killed 2 of them, and then fled from the bar. That happened around, I believe, 10 o'clock that night. And we proceeded for the next several hours to try and locate this individual. And we had him located to an industrial building out north of Rock Springs here. And during the course of that, trying to apprehend him, we had him inside of a building, doors closed, locked and everything. Obviously, he had just he'd shot and killed 2 people, shot another person, and during the brief times we had him on the phone, he was threatening to shoot us as well. So we knew we were in a predicament with him, and obviously we needed to be able to arrest him. And so in doing so, what we did is we utilized our countywide tactical team to do that. And part of that, as we deploy that tactical team, the Sweetwater County Bomb Squad is automatically deployed with that team with us. So one of the things that we did is we needed to get garage doors open in there because we're dealing with an industrial building with basically 6 big bay doors. And we were dealing with 2 potential bays that we knew that he was most likely in that case. So what we did is we actually utilized the robotic assets from the bomb squad and one of the bomb technicians who is very good at operating that particular device. And we were able to have him take that robot and actually go and reach around get the man door open, reach around that man door with the arm of the robot and physically push the button on the garage door opener so that we could open the garage door without basically crushing the garage door in with a truck or with an explosive device, which would have created a bigger problem for us where we would have had a big, 16-foot bay door laying down that we would have had to walk across. Instead, we were able to just roll it up like it was designed and have easy open access without having a mess in the building. So he was able to, instead of putting one of my guys in there to potentially get shot at while we were doing this, we were able to basically stick that robot right around, use the arm, push the door, open it up. And then we were able to at times use that to search with, trying to help search for our suspect in that case. We used some other smaller robots to do that with as well, just based off what we had. But I mean, these are case in point uses outside of just explosive devices, but it obviously helps us do our job safer because the days of the 1990s SWAT of smashing through doors, running and that kind of thing are over because it's not safe. It's not justifiable. So we're trying to do things, slow things down and do it as safe as we can. And obviously, while we understand a $350,000 robot is an expensive asset to have damaged, it's certainly a lot less damage than having one of our people shot and killed. So does that answer your question, Mr. Cole? Thank you, sir.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As long as we're telling stories, I represent Sheridan. And during this last session, Officer Krinky was trying to serve a warrant. And they brought in the crew from, I believe it was Gillette, Campbell County. And they were not gentle to the house. I guess from a layman's perspective, I look at that and think, man, couldn't they have gone in there with something a little less destructive than a bulldozer? Are you able to just briefly address maybe what was used in that case and how you make those decisions of, do we send in a robot or do we just rip the side of the house off? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Pendergraft. Without speaking to this particular instance, I can tell you that there is usually a pretty lengthy decision-making process that goes into how we would handle these kind of operations. So we're going to try usually to do it the least intrusive way possible. However, there may become a time where simply the situation becomes too dangerous, or the tools that we're using to do this in the least intrusive manner possible simply just fail and don't work to accomplish the mission safely. And there may become times, obviously this case in point, I know there was one similar in Casper about a year ago where a similar situation happened. And sometimes there are just things beyond the control that you can do with some of these assets that you just have to escalate that to take it to. And it obviously does look, poor from the layperson standpoint, but unfortunately there are times where that may become the case where it's necessary to as safely resolve it as possible.
Any further questions? Go ahead, Representative Wiley.
Under Sheriff Thomas, thanks for coming today. I just want to make it clear that these robotics and stuff, this equipment can be used for other things other than just, hostile situations. We're talking, chemical spills or gas spills, just, hostile environments that it can also be utilized.
Representative Wiley, that is correct. For instance, our large robot, our Andros FX, that robot's actually equipped with a mount to put a radiation detector on it, so we can go run the robot downrange for a hazmat situation to support the RERTs, to run that equipment down without putting a person in that situation. So there are certainly plenty of other uses outside of hostile people and bombs that we can use those pieces of equipment for.
Okay, any further questions, committee? Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Sheriff. Quick question, how much do you share with other counties, you guys' group, and then also do other counties that you share with, are they helping with your funding as well? Do they, so like, I guess do you share, like you have Sweetwater, do you share with UNA and Lincoln, and do they help you fund what you guys are doing over here, or do they have their own?
So to answer your question, Representative Berger, we do service the Sweetwater County Bomb Squad services, not only Sweetwater County, but also UNA County, Lincoln County, Sublette County. Sometimes Fremont County, we have done things with them. We've done some things with Carbon County. And even at times, I believe Teton County in support of their mission. Now, typically when that happens, it's our equipment going out with them. And as far as funding back, typically we're on the hook for the majority of those costs between wages and salaries, plus, fuel to get there, and generally speaking, the operational supplies that are used. So sometimes that is reimbursed, but that's not the common theme. Usually we're doing that as part of the regional response team effectively. So when we're servicing, say most recently Sublette County, we're basically taking on, there's some reimbursable costs there, but we're basically taking on the initial cost of that response, even to say Sublette County. Does that answer your question?
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to throw out there, when the Sweetwater Bomb Team purchased their Mark V robotic platform, that was purchased by money from Uena County, Lincoln. I think Sublette donated some to that, as well as Sweetwater. I'm not sure about Carbon or anything, but there was a few counties that chipped in to purchase that robot. But that was 12, 14 years ago. So that one's completely out of commission right now because it's so old.
So Representative Nemick, to answer that question a little more thoroughly, that robot was actually purchased in 2007, and that was pooled Homeland Security funds between those counties. So
Any further questions? Okay, all right, okay. All right, thank you. Appreciate it, Under Sheriff.
thank you.
Okay, any further testimony from Homeland Security?
I just wanted to throw out there that one of the things that we're doing now, we had a period of time where the RERTs and the bomb teams were kind of not together. And that's one of the goals of the work that we're doing right now, is to bring those bomb teams sort of back into connection with the regional response teams. They do get activated under a mechanism under the regional response teams, and they're essentially regional matching the regional response teams as well. There's been some confusion about the ability to get reimbursed. And so we're working hard to make sure that those teams understand that that's what we're here to do, is to support them, supporting other counties and other activations as well. I think that's all we have on that subject.
Okay, very good. Okay, committee, any further questions? Representative Brown.
So on the last page, or on the last bullet point, you've got a meeting with the bomb teams scheduled for tomorrow. Just out of curiosity, what the expectation is going to look like as far as prioritization. It is like really echoey up here. I'm sorry. But what that prioritization is going to look like is, are you guys doing a regional prioritization of who you're going to be replacing regionally? What are you expecting to come out of that meeting tomorrow, pending what happens here today?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, very similarly, a conversation that we had with the regional response teams, talking with each other, trying to coordinate who needs what, and how can we prioritize in timing, who's in the worst shape, who's out of bomb suits, who's, got expired bomb suits, those types of things, to try and prioritize the funding that we were given, and hopefully maybe consider additional funding.
Any further discussion, committee? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, go ahead. What's that? Okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you like for us to just move forward with that, or
Yes.
did you want to? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to let you take control of that to start with, and then we'll answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, just to give a brief background on the CERC. So the CERC goes all the way back to 1986, 1987 by executive order in the state. 1986, we had the SARA Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act that gave the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. That came out of an incident in Bhopal, India, where roughly 2,000 people were killed during that event. A U.S. company that had a large manufacturing plant in there released a chemical due to failed safety protocols, essentially. Killed a large number of people instantly. The estimates are upwards of 30,000 that had long-term issues from that incident. And essentially, they wanted to find a way that the community would know what's in their backyard. Obviously, in Wyoming, we have a lot of manufacturing, a lot of plants, a lot of oil and gas. Most people, because we're a small state, are aware of what's in their backyard. But this, it is one of the things that a person, your typical citizen can come out and find information of what exactly is there. The CERC primarily looks at how they educate the community on what their right to know is. And that's primarily done through the local emergency planning committees, the LEPCs. Part of that comes down to the tier 2 filings. Companies are required under section 311 and 312 to report what they have on hand at any given time, plus any new chemicals that come in that might not meet the threshold. For tier 2 specifically, it's 10,000 pounds of any chemical that basically has an SDS, or if it's over the threshold planning quantity for an extremely hazardous substance. So like chlorine is only 100 pounds that's required to report. With those tier 2 filings, you get some basic information of 24-hour point of contact for the facility. You get their location by GPS coordinate. You get pretty much every bit of information you can have, what their emergency procedures are, what chemicals they have on hand, what their average daily amount is, and how much they could store at a maximum capacity. That gives the LEPCs and the local responders the chance to plan for a worst case scenario at that facility. If it was to release into the community, what it would look like and how they could possibly respond to it and what they can do to prevent that from happening. Do you want more on this? Okay. As far as the tier 2 filing goes, it is an unfunded mandate. The state's required to collect that data and utilize it at a local level. However, there's no funding available for the state to process that. Just some basic costs. We do utilize a third-party vendor to collect the data for us, which is Aristatech. Our current contract's at $57,500 per year to collect that data and provide it to our local responders on an online and offline basis. That's part of the reason we do have like a $12,500 additional cost to have an offline database available to them. Because rural Wyoming doesn't exactly have the best internet connection when you're out and about. Many people have driven through and know you don't have a cell phone signal. So to have an offline ability to look at what is in a facility is pretty important for the response side of things. Our new rate for going forward on this next contract is going to be $64,950. We typically contract a 3-year contract, but that's about a 12.95% increase on the contract amount. It's a cost that with the decrease in our funding through SHSP and our other grants, it's a cost that's not going to go down, and it's something we're having less and less money to be able to do. One of the options the CERC has looked at over the course of the last 6 or 7 years is the possibility of adding a tier 2 filing fee to the industry. That way there's some chip in from industry to pay for the cost of maintaining this data. You were provided, and unfortunately just provided today for most of you, roughly a 3-page document. It's only a handful of sentences on the 3rd page. But essentially it breaks down what every state has. There are 16 states that do not have a filing fee, 3 that we couldn't find information on a public facing webpage at all. North Dakota does mention that it has fees, but I couldn't find anything in statute that explained exactly what those fees were. 26 states have fees that the state actually collects, and then 5 that use a program called E-Plan. The E-Plan collects a $25 filing fee, but the state does not receive any of that money. The filing fees vary widely on what they are, how much they are, if they have a cap on how much a company would be on the hook for. In Wyoming, we have, and I do apologize that the top of the page did mention Michigan in there. That was a copy from the EPA's explanation of sections 311 and 312 of SARA Title III that I didn't realize had Michigan in it. So for Wyoming, we have about 9,600 facilities, a little more, 9,687, I think is what we're at now. We have quite a few facilities. Obviously, we don't work with the 9,600 number as what fees would actually be coming in. Because some of those are government facilities, some are voluntary reporters that are not at the level of requirement to file their tier 2 information, but they do it anyways just because they want to let people know what they have. Most states have some sort of mechanism in place to eliminate any government entity that's filing tier 2, whether it be local, state, county level, or federal. Those would be eliminated, and then any that are voluntary filers would likely need to be eliminated as well. It wouldn't make sense to charge them to voluntarily submit information. With that being said, though, there's a wide variety of options as far as what a tier 2 filing fee looks like. Some states cap a company at about $1,000 or $500, depending on the state. Wyoming has one company that makes up almost 40% of their tier 2 filings, with over 1,700 oil wells from one company. So obviously putting one company on the hook for a good chunk might not make sense. And there's an obvious need to balance. We don't want to stifle business from wanting to come to Wyoming with a large fee. The CERC has discussed options between $20 and $50 per facility. And that would be a single fixed facility with no cap to a company. But the idea of a cap has been thrown around as well because the obvious with the oil and gas industry, they have a lot of oil wells and not necessarily as much risk to the community as a large industrial plant would have. But I think that's all I have. I'll stand for questions.
So you mentioned the one company that's doing this right now, and we've got our fee right now. Or you're talking about not placing the fee on one company and having a total cap on that one particular company. Have you guys modeled what a fee would look like? Have you guys done any exploration of where you feel an appropriate level would be?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown. Yeah, it's we've only looked at, because the initial conversation with the CERC were without a cap. We've only really looked at what a $20 fee per facility would look like, which comes out to approximately $170,000 with an estimate of eliminating government entities. That would generate about $170,000, which would be more than enough to cover the Aristotec contract, some CERC funding for their meetings and everything that are unfunded, but now funded, coming July 1st. There's a $20,000 fund for that. But it would cover those meetings. It would also cover some training at the local level, could replace some small equipment maybe, but obviously not anything of a capital nature, nothing large scale. And with the CERC's discussion on being up to a $50 fee, I think that was 480. I don't remember off the top of my head, $450,000+ that would generate. And, you know, obviously that opens up, but the larger the fee, the more likely you are to have less willingness to pay that fee. With a cap, obviously with having a very large company, that would significantly reduce that amount.
So just to follow up on that, is what discussions have been had with industries at this point? Certainly, I would expect that we'll probably have some level of integration into having industry show up at our next meeting if we propose to have a bill draft come and there's going to be a charge to them, but maybe not. What type of outreach have you guys done at this point to have these discussions with them?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, did you want to answer that part with the membership of CERC?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown. One thing that is unique about the CERC is that it contains members of industry on the actual commission. So we do have some input from them directly in the CERC. So they've been part of the conversation. Certainly not a large majority, not a large group of folks, but we do have participation on the CERC from industry.
And just to continue with that, Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, as far as reaching out to actual industry, ones that aren't involved in the CERC, there hasn't been any. With it, just because I field a lot of calls from industry when they are filing their tier 2, most already expect to pay a fee. Most use either a third party to do their tier 2 filings, or if they are doing their own, they're so used to paying fees in a majority of their states that they want to know where to pay it, which we don't have a mechanism or a fee to tell them to pay it. So
as a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, the reason for the fee is because we're providing the online portal. If we didn't provide the online portal, they would have to file this on paper and send it to us. So it's an advantage to them and a convenience to them to be able to do this federally required filing online. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there for their convenience as well.
Senator Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple questions. If you could clarify, you mentioned cell phone coverage. I guess I always assume you're using WyoLink. You don't use that, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, this is with regard to the software that is providing the list of chemicals to the regional response teams. So it's not to communicate with each other. It's to be able to go to a building and go to an area and be able to look up what chemicals are actually in this facility so that they can decide how to respond to that. Does that make sense? No?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up. Well, not really. I mean, you think it'd be on WildLink and to be available because it has more interoperative coverage. But my other question would be is when you go out on a response and there's some chemical spill, do you then charge said industry for said chemical spill, or is it somehow covered? How's that mechanism work? Could you help me? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, there is a provision in the statute that allows for charging of the spiller, if you will. And that does happen. There is many responses where the spiller is first charged or they attempt to get that fee from the spiller first. That's happens at the local level with the regional response team themselves.
Representative Stotler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been listening. I'm just curiosity. What about the railroads, the two class ones, the smaller railroads, the short lines here? How does that work for them? Because they pull some pretty good sized train cars through here.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stivar. As far as the railroads go, because tier 2 is specifically for a fixed facility, something that's in place and doesn't move, they would fall under DOT regulation or, and for the rail side, the federal regulations for rail transport. When hazmat is in transport, it's entirely a different consideration than when it's a fixed facility. Tier 2 specifically only deals with fixed facilities.
Any further questions? Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Director.
I'm sorry. One thing that I neglected, Mr. Chairman, to mention in my previous information, one of the other things as we're talking about prioritizing who gets funding first in the RERTs and the bomb teams, we're also going to be developing a long-term replacement plan so that we can not be in this situation again where we have to replace everything all at the same time. So that is part of our work that we'll be doing going forward.
All right. I had a question. I forgot what it was. Must not be that important. Okay. So any further questions, committee? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Any public comment at this time? Let's see. Anybody in the room? Oh, come on down. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is J.R. Fox. I'm the Deputy Fire Chief for Campbell County Fire Department, and I'm the administrator for Regional Response Team Number 1. We cover Sheridan, Johnson, Campbell, Crook, and Weston counties, one of 8 RERTs. The RERTs are staffed with members of host fire departments and sheriff's departments and other allied agencies. They're specially trained to provide solutions to a wide range of problems that might not be able to be handled at the local level. Most communities in Wyoming cannot support the equipment, the training, or the number of personnel to handle these low-frequency, high-risk events such as hazardous materials release that would require a technician-level entry, an explosives incident, technical rescue, trench collapse, or confined space entry. When these events happen, and they do, local jurisdictions can request an RERT activation through the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security. Once an activation is approved by the director, the team becomes indemnified and a state asset. The RERT program is built to assist all communities, large and small, in Wyoming, and I believe that we fulfill that mission. When an RERT arrives in a local community, they do not take over the incident. They simply fold into the local incident management or incident command structure, provide technical guidance, and work with local responders to bring the incident to a safe resolution. These relationships have been forged over 20 years. The teams have been in existence. The RERTs participate in local and statewide exercises, local emergency planning committees, and THIRAs, or the Threat Hazard Identification Risk Assessment. We use this process to identify gaps in our planning and response capabilities and use this process for grant purchasing justifications. The amount of equipment and training your current RERTs have is vast. The equipment is vital to sustain these teams as they serve the entire state. The cost to upgrade the equipment, keep current equipment maintained, provide ongoing and sustained training is also quite expensive. The current SHSP funding that the director mentioned has done an adequate job keeping these teams equipped and trained. The local fire department and host RERTs and sheriff's department also sponsor a great deal of this training and overtime to ensure compliance and advanced training. It's reasonable to assume that in the future, this federal pass-through funding may not be adequate to sustain the RERT program. The SHSP funding has allowed the state to equip and fund these teams for 20 years. The most expensive equipment these teams possess is currently nearing end of life. The equipment includes specialized vehicles that store the equipment and transport the responders, including the bomb suits and robots. In closing, the RERTs have developed close partnerships with responders in their region. Local fire departments and law enforcement agencies continue to resolve technical and complex incidents across the state. I thank you for your time. I'm happy to be answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thanks, sir. Appreciate any questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just say thank you for making a long trip to come down here and deliver those remarks. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Any further comment? Come on down.
Transportation Committee.
Senator and Chairman, Amy Binning. I am originally from Sublette County, Wyoming, where I served in emergency response as EMS fire for 13 years. And I also helped develop 2 first responder companies, or actually private industry companies that were first responder units. And then I also taught OSHA compliance training for over 5,000 students in 5 years. I took a job, and that's why Representative Brown knows me now. I do work at WYDOT currently. I do sit on the CERC. My husband and I own a construction company, Binning Mill, Core Valley Construction. It's been in existence since 1990 in Sublette County. And then I'm also a 20-year rancher in Albany County. So we have a large ranch over there with my family. The reason I wanted to speak today in regards to the CERC and the Tier 2 filing is because I want to talk to you a little bit about the ease of the portal when and how it related to what I did in Sublette County. So in Sublette County, it significant 2 explosions during the time that I worked there in EMS. And we never lost anyone from those 2 explosions, but we had 5 individuals in our community that were critically injured and burned over 80% of their body. I can tell you that it was very frustrating as an EMS responder to not know what I was dealing with that was impacting those patients at the time. Because it was a battery of 5 tanks that had exploded. I couldn't pull any of the information from that site. I didn't know what other threats we had. We were trying to develop a response zone and a response area so we could safely evacuate those individuals. As on the private training side, when we worked with the OSHA compliance side of it, and the Tier 2 filings were a part of that. As a third party, sometimes a company would hire us to file their Tier 2 facility reports. We were not required to share that with emergency response agencies. However, the development of the Tier 2 portal was something that was very significant. It was significant for the local emergency planning committees because now they had direct access to the Tier 2 filings that were submitted in each one of their counties and for the RERTs in each one of their regions. What they can do with that information is they can pull it up in their LEPC meetings that sometimes they have once a quarter or once a month, and they can prepare for and go through scenarios where they can practice responding to those emergencies. If I had had that capability and that information to access the response and plan my response, we could have maybe mitigated the impacts to our patients a lot better. Now, you've heard from the RERTs who specialize in responding to CBRNE events, but Emergency medical services aren't at that same level. We don't have a specialized team responding to these patients that have sea burning experience. We rely on them for experience. The second emergency that took place in Sublette County was, I believe, in 2010, and it was a mercury spill at the high school. Many of you guys might have remembered that. They ended up shutting down the school for, I think, 5 days until they could dissipate the mercury. And the mercury was not on a tier 2 facility report because it was in a science room and didn't have a reportable quantity. However, if I had had that information that comes from that tier 2 portal information and from Arista Tech, I could have pulled up not only the impacts of mercury, but also the mitigation efforts that we needed to take. The RERT team did come down from Rock Springs or Riverton. I can't remember which one came at the time, and helped us to mitigate that event. So when we talk about the significance of a tier 2 facility report and the progression, the electronic filing, that is such a huge benefit. And I can tell you that for industry, their liability goes up the further away their response agencies are from them. If you can give them a way to share that information with emergency responders so that they can mitigate those impacts that they have on the community, and they can coordinate and plan with emergency response entities, it is a relief for them. Because when we were establishing those 2 first responder units that were owned by private industry, the biggest worry that they had was, how long is it going to be until responders come into this area? And we were like, well, you're in the middle of Sublette County. It could be 45 minutes. It could be an hour. So those are the things that they worry about. I wanted to give another example of how the information from the tier 2 facility report and the local emergency planning committee was used in Albany County, which is an area where I reside currently. In 2014, so one of the things that the CERC does is they fund through a grant the commodity flow studies, and the commodity flow studies look at key roadways or industry that's traveling into that area and what those hazmat materials are. So we studied in Albany County, we studied I-80 and we studied the railroad. And we identified through there that there was several chemicals being transported on those transportation routes that could impact our water. And in Albany County, we have a Casper aquifer that feeds all of the water into the city for potable water. And that is primarily restored from rainwater and also from the Laramie River. So water was a critical asset. And if you also know this about our county, there's very limited areas that you can build a house and have well water. You have to transport the water oftentimes from the city. So water is a critical resource, and we wanted to mitigate any hazards or impacts to that water. We worked with the LEPC, and we worked with some of the water coalitions within the area to identify what we could do to better prepare and mitigate any hazards to the community. One of the things that we found out is we really didn't know very much about the underground water source. And some of the concerns that we heard from the groups were, hey, if the RERT put in some spill areas or some special drainage along Telephone Canyon, they could mitigate any hazard to the water source. And we were like, well, that's a lot of money. And let's see if that's going to really mitigate it or not, right? So the LEPC worked with a grant, and we flew the area, and we identified that our water table was so far down, and we actually worked with the University of Wyoming, that we weren't going to have that much impact to our water source. But that would never have happened if we hadn't had the commodity flow study, which the CERC provided. It would never have happened if our LEPC hadn't worked with our water coalitions to find out our priority and how they saw to best mitigate any response or impact to it. And it really wouldn't have happened if we didn't have that tier 2 facility information coming in to show us what exactly we needed to mitigate. because the phosphorus and other things that were going across the interstate and on the rail, they react with water in a negative way. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to testify.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, thanks for that information. Appreciate it. Okay, any further public comment? Okay, anybody online? Okay. Looks like public comment is closed on this topic. Committee, what's your pleasure? Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I kind of want to give a little bit of a background on especially the tier 2 stuff. Just so the committee is aware, this was brought to us by Senator Barlow, who is actually sent this information to us and sits on the CERC as well. And this information was brought to this committee just simply due to the fact that poor Ms. Budd does not have a home committee. And so in the process of not really having a home committee, and they saw that we were also discussing the other portions of Homeland Security information, this was thrown in at the behest of both chairmen. All right. So I do think that it's a little outside of our wheelhouse, but I also do understand you guys really don't have another wheelhouse to be put into besides appropriations. And I think we all understand nobody wants to go in front of appropriations all the time. So with that being said, Mr. Chairman, I am going to make a motion that we draft a bill. And I want to leave it open. What I'd like to do is I would like to have some more input, and I would really like to have some information from you guys on what that fee really does need to be, and also what a cap would look like if we capped that one company. So what I'm going to say is a bill draft to increase or sustain a tier 2 filing fee, leave the fees open at this point of XX, and then also have in their language adoptable for us to have a cap for a maximum amount per company. So that'll be my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, moved by Representative Brown, second by Representative Nemeth. Any discussion? Senator Kolb.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered, who is this a governor's creation? I don't know enough a background about how this came about. It seems like an appropriation. It seems like a question like that, but I don't know. Could you tell me how you came to be in existence and who's in charge of said thing? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb.
Go ahead.
There we go. Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb. Are we talking about the CERC? Is that correct? I don't have the date, but it is actually created due to federal regulation. We are required to have an entity that collects these fees, and he's going to tell you more.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb. So the CERC was, the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act was originally in 1986. In 1987, the Wyoming governor at the time added the executive order that started the CERC. Eventually in 2004, the CERC became established in statute, which I don't have my notes in front of me to give you the statute that is, but that was when it was officially established. It was 2004 in statute, 1987 by executive order.
Yep, go ahead.
Since we're on discussion, when we meet again and bring this back up, can we reach out to mining, oil and gas, get some industry involvement here?
Oh, we absolutely will. Yeah, and that obviously that'd be the part of the discussion here if we move forward is, it's hard to say that those folks aren't paying, already carrying their weight around here when it comes to taxes and fees and so on. But yeah, so that'll be part of the discussion. Absolutely. And it would be, I know you can't probably tell us exactly where all the facilities are. It's confidential, but if we have a general idea of, which industries have, pay X or have so many, what the different categories of the different filings are. And you'll see if in some of these examples, they have different fees for different industries too. So there's lots of possibilities here. So yeah. And I remember my question now, if nobody else has one. is that, we're talking about exempting government entities. Is that standard? Or why wouldn't, say, if the government entity is receiving the same service as a private entity, why wouldn't they also pay?
Mr. Chairman, as far as, I would say it is the norm across the 30 or so states that have a fee. They do exempt government entities pretty much across the board. For the federal side of things, most federal entities do not have an ability to pay a fee through that legislation that started this in the first place. For example, the EPA, a lot of times, in spill response, is able to come in and fine a company. But if it's another federal entity in a federal park, for example, if they spill something that they maintain on their own, there's no ability for the EPA to make them pay for that. So most states have had to exempt the federal entities automatically because of that. There's no method for them to pay. Yeah, I would say it's a norm across the board, though, is to exempt all government and voluntary filers.
Okay. Representative O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right back to the very start, you mentioned you used to get 15.9 million. Was that yearly? And now you're only getting, was it 4.3 or 3.4? And I'm wondering when that started.
Mr. Chairman, Representative O'Hearn, yes, your numbers are correct. It was an annual grant. The Homeland Security Grant, as well as the Emergency Management Performance Grant, are at the whim of Congress and them funding those grants. The allocations generally are based on population. And so to even blow your mind further, that was the lowest grant. So there was a lot of money out there at that point in time supporting Homeland Security and emergency response. The total grant that we got in 24 for this year is 4.6. 3.78 is going to the local level. And it has just gradually over the years, I mean, that was 20 years ago, gradually over the years, the amount has decreased. And again, we just sustained a 10%, all DHS and FEMA grants, a 10% decrease across the board, which includes assistance to firefighters, all of the grants.
Representative Pendergrove.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This just kind of a general question in the funding. I mentioned the house in Sheridan. There was also a house in Evansville, similar sort of thing. I'm kind of wondering how often this sort of thing happens in other places and how it's funded. In this case, for example, City of Sheridan stepped up with a total of $267,000. This woman's insurance company fronted $217,000, and I still don't think she has enough to rebuild the house, much less the rest of the things are in there. When we talk about funding, maybe trying to think outside the box, is there some way to create a pool that when one of these leaders says, okay, we're going to tear the house apart, there is some money there to help? This is a horrible thing that happened in my community. It's a horrible thing that happened in Evansville. It's not necessarily anybody's fault other than the guy that did the thing. But I would like us to consider that when we think about how this could be funded, and I don't have the answers, certainly.
Okay, any further discussion or comments? Right, so tier 2 filing fees. Okay. So all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Okay, that motion carries. Any further discussion, committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I still want to look into the long-term funding of the RERTs and the bomb squads. I don't think we're there yet for a bill draft, but I think we need more information after they meet with the bomb teams, get that information, see what the big dollar amount is looking like. I kind of know what it's going to be, but might be a little bit of sticker shock for the rest of the folks on the committee, but I want to continue looking at this. Thank you.
Right, yeah, and we absolutely will. I think, there's plenty of options. As I said, our energy industries pay plenty. So there's, the such thing as severance, under the cap severance distributions, we can you know, and probably talk to some of our appropriations friends and see if there's something that we can get that's steady and consistent, and you know, that using existing revenue streams potentially when, and you know, that I think go very nicely with the bill draft we just authorized to have a filing fee. So lots of options, and certainly if you have any other ideas from other states, you know, that we'd be open to hearing that too. But yeah, want to have all the options on the table, and yeah, it would be good to have some more information. And so, okay, any further general discussion on this topic? Okay, well, looks like that finishes it up for today as far as our agenda. We will have a tour thanks to Representative Nywick and his friends. You want to go over anything there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'll let her know we could be up there about 3:30 to give you enough time to go ahead and get out of your suits, wear comfortable clothing, jeans and t-shirts, wear a hat. There's no facilities out there other than the sagebrush and a couple magazines you could hide behind. But, you know, please use the facilities, drink some water, and we're going to have a lot of fun. You'll probably get to do something you'll probably never ever done before. Maybe you on the hand have. So we're gonna blow some stuff up, and we're gonna have some fun.
Committee, need your travel vouchers before you leave. So make sure you get myself or Chairman Boner to sign off on your travel vouchers so we can get those over to LSO as quickly as possible too.
Okay, looks like we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.